running in place, but it feels like it's so compelling to ruminate or to worry. And so it's always helpful to point out the similarities between what we treat, so it doesn't feel like you have to start from scratch. Like, oh, I know how to treat GAD, but I don't know how to treat depression. That there's always more in common than that's different across the diagnoses that we treat. So we spoke a little bit last time how really thinking about ERP, exposure response prevention for depression, can be helpful in terms of we're exposing our client to what it's like to live, to take action, to engage in behaviors, and to risk disappointment. So if you're going for a walk to get pee, if you're and risking that maybe it doesn't matter because maybe nothing matters. So it feels scary to act as though maybe life can be okay. And so really the exposures we're engaging in are exposures to taking the chance of choosing life. And then the response prevention it's that mental compulsion of ruminating, kind of curling up under a blanket and just reviewing and reviewing and reviewing and getting kind of in deep in a hole. And kind of I always go back to that ACT metaphor of if somebody falls into a ditch and the only tool that they have with them is a shovel, it makes sense that we're going to want to, I got a shovel, I'm in a bad situation, let me try to get out of it, I'm going to shovel my way out of this. But as humans, we try to do something when things are hard. So the thing that one doesn't with depression is let me just think and think and think. Unfortunately, if you're in a ditch with a shovel and you keep digging and digging, you're just getting deeper. So at the very least, if we could just drop, whether it's with ACT, like drop the rope, like a tug of war, or drop the shovel. And in terms of that ruminating about the past, which we really want to separate out from actually making contact with pain, making contact with feelings of loss. And so we're not telling people like, don't worry, be happy, or, don't think. We're saying don't ruminate, which is very different from making full contact with the wholeness of life, with what it is, not what we wish it could be, with the good and the bad and the pain, making contact with hard thoughts. So it gets tricky when we talk about response prevention against ruminating. It could sound like we're talking about like thought stopping. Like, oh, you're having that thought, just don't think about it, which can, of course, be very not validating. We're saying let's practice disengaging from the compulsion of spinning in place. Like that might be really making contact with the loss of a loved one, of a breakup, of what it feels to feel rejected. We're going to make contact with all of that. That's the exposure also. It's just when thinking becomes a compulsion that we're engaging in response prevention. It's tricky when we think about disengaging from mental compulsions. We could tell us, like, we notice when we're engaging in external compulsions, like, oh, this couch feels germy, I'm going to use hand sanitizer, I'm going to wash my hands. It's very obvious when we're engaging in external compulsion. It's harder for an individual to notice themselves when they're engaging in internal compulsion of thinking, and even from the outside. So sometimes even working with clients in session, I might kind of come up with a code that we both can use when, like, and you could also hear a client kind of switching from actually making open contact with thoughts and feelings to it becoming a compulsion. So for example, if a client is saying like, I felt like such a bad mom, and I felt that if only I weren't so messed up. I'm thinking of a client I worked with a couple months. If only I weren't so messed up, my daughter would, she wouldn't be struggling right now, and just the feeling like I disappointed her. And but then when I think about, there was that time where I was at the park with a friend and her daughter was bullying her, and I could have stopped. Like I could almost see it has a different rhythm and has a very different feeling when someone goes from making contact and opening up to talking and thinking in a compulsion-y way. And so I might, with a client, say like, okay, well, I'm just going to kind of let's start noticing when your thinking and talking is becoming more of avoidance or trying to prove to yourself, in fact, you aren't a failure, or trying to figure out something to from just experiencing it. And so it's a really nice way to, like, we get together, like, okay, I'll say time out, or and kind of do it together too, is really, it's kind of fun. Joey?
I see you could tell I had a question.
Yeah.
I guess to evoke that, then, like when working with the client in session, you wouldn't have to do much evoking, right? Because if they're in that state relatively constantly and it's like automatic to them, you're just working with what's there. Like it's not ERP with the external kind of things where like you're introducing something to them.
Yeah. Well, like with a total understanding with this client, for example, like we did some direct, like, I can never protect my children from suffering. Like, they will always suffer no matter what I do. My kids are going to suffer. Or like, I permanently mess them up. Like that thing that her brain keeps trying to prevent from happening or prove isn't true. We did, and at different times have to like do direct contact with that core fear, because it's still so hot and so sticky, and she's got so much more. We've worked on it so much that it doesn't pull her in so rapidly, so quickly, and she's able to diffuse now from it. But I don't think it was so hardwired into her sense of self and into that just disengaging from that alone, it would have been all
a little bit, like
like direct exposures at different points, and then at different points we're just noticing and sometimes going back even through in a session, like, okay, no matter what, my children will suffer, so like we're weaving it in. Sometimes it's like, if we could just disengage, cool, kind of like, I don't know if anyone's read Brain Lock. It's kind of like an old school OCD book. Has anyone ever read Brain Lock? But it's about like step 1, noticing an OCD thought. Step 2, saying like, this is my brain on OCD. Step 3, disengaging. Like, that's cool and that's great. But sometimes when it's so hot and when a thought is so compelling, you get sucked in so quickly that if someone's at that point where they can disengage, then they should. But it's when they keep falling in so quickly, I find it needs some like direct tending to. I don't have any questions about that, more of the like formal, I'm calling it exposures, but like contact with hot thoughts. Danielle?
So like the direct tending to is just like, I'm a little bit confused about that. Like repeating the thought and like going over it until it doesn't have the same weight. Like my kids will suffer, my kids will suffer, my kids will suffer. Like, I'm still just a little confused, like what the exposure is. Like you're focusing on it, but you're trying not. I don't understand.
And I just want to try to understand your question. If you're trying to understand the value of exposure, or you're trying to understand the value of exposure in this situation.
I'm trying to understand what the exposure actually would be
in this situation. So like for this client, the exposure is, so like, I always go back to like basic OCD, on the outside, nothing's basic in life, but like, okay, so I touch this couch, the exposure, the core fear, the obsession. I'm germy, I'm gross, I'm unsafe, I'm germy. Basically like, I'm not okay. So that's really what the obsession is in that situation. So for the client that I just described, the obsession would be, my kids are gonna suffer. My kids are gonna have pain in their life. My kids are gonna suffer. Basically, the idea of her kids suffering and the fact that she can't prevent all the suffering, which she can't. And so trying to get control over the uncontrollable. So, and that could be, that exposure could be like looking at a picture of her from her daughter from camp, sitting alone when everyone else is in a group, and her mind saying like she's alone at sleepaway camp, she has no friends. And if she's doing a compulsion of trying to look at that picture and like, is she with friends? Maybe like, what does her face look? She's spending all this time doing that. We might just do an exposure of like, this is her at camp. She's alone. She's alone. So we're dropping the rope like any other exposure. We're opening up to whatever that fear is, that at the end of the day, no matter what we do, we can't prevent. There will be, her kids will have some suffering in life. And so if her brain's doing all these different things, so that exposure would be the same thing for me as like any other exposure I would do with her, of making contact with, or, like my kids will suffer, or for her, then it goes back to, and then I will, how hard it will be to feel her kids suffering. Yeah.
So like, but like the exposure is thinking those thoughts.
The exposure is, so I would say like it's kind of multi-sensory when you're doing an imaginal exposure. So the exposure is like thinking the thought, and sometimes with the client, it's also, I try to also have an image. So like with them, like what are we like, it's not just blah, 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 but like actually like, can you hear something? Can you smell something? But like as close as you get to that image of like, what are we seeing? Like I'm seeing her, like my child will suffer, like, and in that, whatever in that moment we're going to conjure up, but we're going to stick with that and go as deep into it as possible. And the more sensory senses that we could bring in, like having that thought, seeing that image, hearing the sound of her wailing, that no one likes her at camp. So it's kind of like any other imaginal exposure. We're not just saying the thought. We're not just thinking the thought. We're like having the thought. We're holding the thought. We're making contact with all that thought means.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
So versus like thinking, because the client might say back, but like, this is what I do all the time. I'm always thinking my child will suffer. And so they'll say back, but this is what I do all the time. That's what's torturing me. And that's when I separate out the obsession from the compulsion. So the obsession, the core fear, the catastrophic thought is my child will suffer. But that thought might come up for teeny tiny. It's an intrusive thought, like, or intrusive feeling. But then what happens is, how are they going to survive that? Like, they're actually doing a mental compulsion of problem solving. They don't know that. So they're saying, well, that's what I'm doing all day long. No, you're thinking, you're problem solving, you're reviewing, you're doing mental compulsions versus like mindfully making contact with the feeling, the thought, all it means. But they'll say like, that's what I'm doing all the time. And that's why it's really tricky, like mental compulsions. When is thinking a compulsion and when is thinking an exposure? So Danielle, is that kind of what you were struggling with? Like thinking?
Yeah. I was just kind of like, well, if we're just having them think about it, what's the difference?
Right.
What's the difference?
Like, we're saying that they shouldn't sit there and think all day long and ruminate. So we're having that. Yeah. So it's a really good, I have to constantly remind myself too. It's like obsession, compulsion. Like what's the intrusive thought? And I know we're talking about depression, but what is the core thought, the core fear that shows up that you don't want to have? What's the thing, that experiential avoidance you're trying to avoid? That pops up quickly. And then everything else we do is to like not have that pain and suffering. Yes, CJ, I feel like you have CJ, were you about to, or you're just like thinking, I don't know, you looked, no, you just have an expressive face. Any, kind of playing with this idea of it's really good questions and tricky, like mental experiential avoidance versus what we do on the outside. when we eat, when we drink, when we run away from things. But when worrying is the thing that we do to avoid our internal experience. It's so intertwined. And something I mentioned last time, but just as a call out, like we do a lot of active therapy at Light Anxiety and just helping to engage in life. And so there's always an opportunity for walk and talk therapy. So if someone is just so stuck in session, and if it feels like the whole session is really more of a mental compulsion, like they're just like so stuck reviewing, they might be so fused in that moment. What we don't need to do is just be like a place for them to ruminate out loud. You might be like, let's just walk and talk. Or it could even just be like around the office, or let's just say it's not nice out. We could even just like in session practice, like mindfully noticing like blue chair, like just redirecting from that mental compulsion. If the whole session is really them just so stuck in that circular thinking, there are ways to, like, at the very least, let's do a little mini response prevention while we're together. So just to call out for, I know in other practices, maybe it's less so using the environment, the community around you to get out of the office, but a quick, like, I think it's time for a walk and talk. I don't even ask. Someone could say no to me, but if I said, like, do you want to do what, like, they're going to say no. So I'd rather say, you know what, let's walk and talk. And then they might, if they really are like my foot, if they have a good, I'll stop. I stop pretty quickly, but I definitely don't ask first, do you want to do that? Because they will definitely say no at the times that I most think it would be helpful. Yeah. Even like standing up in session together, like I maybe like, or I don't know, different office, we have like a little mini trampoline, like anything that's like, let's just reboot, is always helpful. Okay. So for the treatment of depression, behavioral activation is really about like doing the behaviors first that would be in line with what would be important to somebody, and then allowing the feelings to eventually catch up. So it's not about waiting to want to go to your child's school play, or want to exercise, or want to, and it could even be like a pleasurable thing, like want to get your nails done. You're not going to want to do anything. By definition, depression is, your brain and body in a state of like hopelessness, where all energy is being preserved, because if whatever you do isn't going to work, you're just wasting your energy. It does make sense to hide out and stay put until there's something that could be effective. So that's how it feels, that no matter what I do is just going to be a waste of energy. That is reasonable, except that's not actually the case. It just feels like that. So what behavioral activation is about, and I'm going to continue 1 second, is about really prescribing and defining behaviors that, not what would you want to do this week, because they don't want to do anything this week, but maybe like prior to depression, what were things that you did enjoy, or maybe a values clarification exercise, like what are your values and what behaviors could be in line with that, because depressed or not, you still care about the community you live in, still matters. So there are different ways to get at these positive activities to use for behavioral activation. Anna?
Yeah, I just wanted to add this just as an idea. I think the walk and talks help a lot too, because there's a lot of stimuli outside, especially outside of the Lakeview office or the River North office, like construction and things that I think it helps more than doing it even in the office, because it can be just less realistic than their normal lives, where you're walking around with your kid and there's all this stuff that you're scared of. Or for like, I think of even just contamination, like you're outside, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of yucky. And yeah, doing that mindfulness outside of the office helps a lot more, I think, than being inside the office sometimes.
Yeah. And even like a rain walk, like we all can have our umbrellas, or like, and it's cold and we like it
The
takes a
stress
little-
tolerance. Oh yeah.
and yeah, like I've just had like beautiful, like really cold winter walks with clients to just see that there still are trees and like the world is still happening beyond like all the shutdown you're feeling inside. And so it takes, I think, lots of compassionate nudging, which is, I think, my specialty. It's always coming with like a belief in a person and that movement is possible. Winter walks, ice bath. Yeah, if we could, yeah. That although I have a client who's found like ice baths were like so helpful for getting her unstuck. So she goes to a physical therapy place for ice baths. Okay, so what if your client is virtual and also immobile due to medical? And so we spoke about this last time, so I'll try to not be utterly redundant because I know you're new, but even like if I have a client that's so shut down, it might even be like I will literally like, can you just raise your hands, and if can you just do this, and can you just do this? So any movement is movement and showing the brain that change is possible. Like I was just here and now I'm here. So anything is sending the signal that we in fact are not stuck. Like in fact, I'll have a client like, I'm stuck, nothing's ever going to change. I'm stuck, nothing's ever. And it's kind of funny to have that thought, say that thought, and then at the same time, like something's changing. Like I just saw a bush and now I'm seeing a wall. Like it's hard to hold on to that thought that long in some ways. I love having clients savor things, appreciate awe, and this was Susan, you want to share a little bit about savoring? You're probably trying to find it. I only have eight squares on. Do you see Susan on here?
I see Susan, yeah. Susan, I see that you're unmuted. We just can't hear you. Do you want to try? Try one more time, maybe?
Sometimes you have to unmute and then turn the volume up also.
Still
Can
can't
you-
quite hear you.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Yay.
Okay.
I knew if we hung in there.
Yeah,
we
I'm having a
would
little
hear
technical problem with my
Hi.
camera too, but
you. Okay. Hi.
so all right, so I love positive psychology, and I was reading some books by Barbara Fredrickson, and who's a professor, I think, at North Carolina or UNC, and she had 10 positive psychology emotions and one of them I used with someone who was looking in the mirror all the time, kind of like spending a lot of time like this far away, even like this far away. So we first started practicing like getting further away from the mirror, and then he started focusing on appreciating things in his environment. So it could be anything from a conversation and socializing with friends to beautiful sunset or trees. And that was something that for him was actually mind-blowing. He, at the end of his PHP IOP treatment, he said that was a big turning moment for him. And I was like, okay, that's really amazing to know.
Yeah. No, just that moment that you're holding a crispy leaf and it's like, oh, wow, that bird, that red is red. And so I'm sensitive to like using the word appreciating, just because I feel like when someone's really depressed, there's like an opposite, like I might choose like notice and describe. So sometimes like when someone's not, there's like a joy phobia or like pressure to be like, and some people are ready to talk about the word appreciation. So I would just point out like when someone's really, really stuck, like mindfully noting, I see the color blue and I feel like the texture of the and like appreciate, or I don't know. So I would just say, like, depending on how, you know.
Yeah, I think I was
It is-
using like a shorthand to
Oh,
explain
no,
what
no. I
we
I
were
think
doing.
in
But
general, yeah.
um
I think,
yeah, I can see how using the word appreciate could really backfire.
and everything with like gratitude, a lot of the words like gratitude journals, like, that's what we're trying to get someone to do, but sometimes they're just not yet ready to actively know that that's the journey that we're on, because like it's like holding tight onto the cozy blanket of depression, because it does feel it's safer, and there's it's reinforced in the brain that this is the right move to make, and so with no judgment, like, it feels like the smartest thing to do is hole up, and there's a holding tight to it, and that's coming from a place that fully makes sense. And so we're just trying to, like, yeah. So I think that it's all the language that we use really around gratitude and appreciate. I'm just kind of calling out that sometimes that could backfire with some like actually using that word. Yeah. So, but thank you. That is super, super helpful. So in terms of behavioral activation, I just want to point out we have in therapy notes, these worksheets are available in the library. One thing to point out, we have in the portal forms are measures that a client can fill out within the portal, versus we have some library forms that are PDFs. So at some point I might make these into portal forms, but I just haven't had a chance yet. So they're stored right now in the library. So you would send them as a PDF that they could fill out. You could either fill out together or have them fill out at home, of listing out what are different positive activities they can engage in. And so really looking at what is the ease of that activity. So maybe go for a walk, like, depending on who the client is, that could be a 9 and the reward 6, and it could even be just like stand up every hour and take a sip of water, like leave your water cup on the counter and stand up and go to the other end of the room and get water. So maybe the ease of that would be, okay, an 8, that wouldn't be so hard. The reward, like 2 or 3, it's not super great, but it is kind of nice to not be so thirsty. So kind of balancing out some things rewarding, like going to visit my child. I haven't seen them and they live in California since my grandchild was born. That might be a reward of 10, but the ease of it'd be the opposite. So no ease, like 0. So we just kind of want to we want to balance out those two things, some things that are achievable, and then also things that provide a little, or sometimes moderate or good amount of movement towards what somebody values. And then working with a client to create a weekly schedule for behavioral activation. So trying to kind of really think, I would do this together because it's really, really hard on one's own to come up with a schedule. People tend to be overly ambitious in some ways and unrealistic. Like, I could go for a 15-minute walk, I could go to the gym 6 days a week. And because it feels like I should be able to do that. It's not so hard. Everybody's doing that. I should be able to clean my whole apartment. Like, how about if you pick up one thing from the floor of your room and put it in the laundry basket? Like, that's powerful and that's a step. And so I would just really, with clients, try to just start with really, really like small, and then each week, like, letting them know we're just being curious. Some of these are going to feel shouldn't be a problem. You're going to realize that they are a problem because there was a lot more emotion or something else happened. We just need to be curious about why it didn't happen and notice when beating it's going to show up. Oh, I didn't do it. I'm a failure. Oh, I failed. I'm lazy. I can't accomplish anything. We just need to notice when that shows up, which, by the way, is also a mental compulsion. beating oneself up. It's kind of like a rug. If we just beat the dirt out of it, I don't know what you do with a rug, but it feels like we're accomplishing something. So just noticing when someone doesn't achieve what's on their behavioral activation plan, it's about being curious and then coming up with new experiments. And then when they do beat themselves up, which they will, kind of noticing that together. Joey.
I'm thinking like bipolar depression, and like maybe you could use this for like the lows, like the depressive episodes, but I'm wondering like for people that experience some mania and they have like common behaviors within that mania, could you use this to be like instead of I'm gonna stand up and go across the room and get a drink of water, could you use like okay, if their compulsion is spending a lot of money, Monday through Friday, I'm not going to spend it. I'm going to try and spend only $5 instead of like 50. Like when they're on kind of that roll of mania, like could you?
I would think like any healthy behavioral plan with the client. Yeah. Like whether it's depressed, whether it's, I mean, you could use this. I'm going to share it again to see what the columns are before I say that. So weekly for behavioral activation could lead you having positive experience in your day. If you're feeling depressed, unmotivated. So like, I mean, if you're working with someone with OCD who tends to like, instead of, I don't know, like doing some basic household stuff they need to do when they get home, instead they do all these compulsions of cleaning their shoes. But instead, okay, when I get home, I'm going to, so I would just say in general, who can't benefit from a schedule of like effective behaviors
Yeah.
to engage in? So yes.
Yeah.
Does that make, and if that's like
Yeah.
evening, going to winding down at 10 p.m., turning off the computer and
Putting the shoes
reading
in
a
the
book.
closet and
Yeah.
compulsively cleaning them.
Just
Yeah.
like a schedule for the week, like that's in therapy notes.
Yeah.
Okay. And Suzanne, I'm doing a time check because if we don't, the good news is there's almost such great questions, good information that if we do her case next week too, that's great too. So the next main tool in the toolbox, when we think about the treatment for depression, we're going to cover so many things that are going to be helpful for depression in terms of ACT. So many of the DBT skills that we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks are great for depression, but sort of like depression 101, we think about behavioral activation. How do we get moving even when really our energy supply is like running on empty? It's not, someone's not, of course we know, being lazy, and someone's not faking it that everything seems so hard, but actually like one's brain, if we did a brain scan on depression, it's less lit up. There is less energy that is available, and that makes sense for protective purposes if there's not something to accomplish. So the main things that we do is just like depression 101, behavioral activation, and then kind of cognitive therapy around addressing, noticing some of the thinking patterns that show up for each individual with their own personal depression. So yes, the thoughts are going to be about hopelessness, about oneself, the future, the world around, but everyone has their own flavor of what those thoughts are going to represent. So we can use cognitive therapy and thought logs to start noticing those thoughts. And shout out to this form here is available in it's available as a in the library. We could send it to clients in session, but it's also always available through their portal. So this is just like a sample portal image that I have here that says always available. So if I were a client, I just wanted to kind of combine learning goals right now for you guys. Hopefully I could pull off like 3 different goals in one moment. We'll see. So like with a client in session, I might, there's a lot of helpful things that they can access in their client portal. So I will have them like in session through their phone, create just, they could save on their home screen of their phone a link to the portal. So our portal is not, it's not an app, but at the same time, all we need to do to make a website an app is you just need to save like a bookmark to it. So I sort of have for myself that available from my phone. You just save it to home screen. So it'll just say Light on Anxiety Portal. And that way the client can just like log in at any point. And so I just logged into my sample portal. And then if I go to, this is me as a patient, go to documents, and I just go to like always available. I can at any point access, oh, I'm feeling really stuck. I could either like ruminate about how much of a loser I am, or I can create a thought log and track the thought and what's going on. And this is always available. You could send it to them for homework, but you could also point out to them they can do this on the go. And so, you know, this is, I'm going to go to the next. How about we all open it up together? If you guys could go into therapy notes as a clinician, and I'm going to just show you guys where it lives. Sure, you guys are always faster than me, and you're probably there already, but I'm just gonna. Okay, so if you go to the library and then you go to the portal forms, raise your hand if you're, everyone's good so far with getting to the library portal forms. Just if you're ever looking for a form, you could also sort them by name. So this is a thought log. And you could either, you know what I was just thinking? We can't, the measures you can fill out with a client in session, but the portal, this form you would send to the client, or you would have them, I would have them open up their phone so they could practice doing it together. So then I'm going to ask you something unfair, and then you could talk about your case next time, but maybe now you could just be that client, and let's just kind of want to practice filling out a thought log together, and you could be this client, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I think, okay, we'll just start the role play now. Okay.
Good.
So we, I know we've spoken in the past a little bit about when your core catastrophic thought shows up for you. How would you, like, how would you summarize your core catastrophic thought?
I think it would be like I'm scared of, you know, kind of never feeling like myself again, kind of, because I'm starting to feel like how I did back when I was hospitalized, and that just doesn't feel like me. It feels really bizarre. I don't know, or, you know, not feeling, never being able to get back to, feeling like my best self, because I just don't feel like I can really do anything right now.
So like you're never going to be that you're always going to be trapped in who you are now. Like you're never going to be that person again. You're always going to be stuck in, I don't know, how would you say the end of the sentence? What is this? Stuck. Who are you now?
I mean, this feels like it just is like my darkest place. It's almost like, because I was telling you too, like I just was like, couldn't do my job. I felt like I wanted to curl up in a ball. So kind of just maybe it's like not really being like my functional self or something.
So like always just stuck in darkness, not functioning, just broken and not functioning.
Which is, I mean, I haven't been that way in a while. It's just haven't been that way in a while. So it's scary.
Right. It does. And it doesn't feel accurate with like the life that you have been living, but that fear of like, I'm going to be stuck, not functioning.
I've like normally I can do so many different things and like, I haven't even been able to shower in the
Okay.
past couple days.
Okay.
So that's just, it feels like such a, like
Right. You really feel like
so
you're
different.
back there when that was like ongoingly, not just a couple of days that you've been in this space. So what I want to practice with you, and I know everyone, whoever has to go in 3 minutes, I think I'll tee it up for next time, is that what I would in session, because really having someone practice filling it out on their own is going to help them to then the next time that they're home or they're at a restaurant and feeling so bad about themselves and they can excuse themselves, and like take a moment to try to practice getting unstuck from the thought. If they could fill it out themselves from their phone, that's going to help a lot. So what we could do is start off like the next meeting we have. What I would do in session is like, so I just want you to log into your portal and then kind of go down to the thought log, and then we're going to fill this out together, but I'm going to have you fill it out. And let's just kind of think of like the most recent time in the last couple of days. It could be the last few minutes that this thought has shown up. And then we're going to try to break down a little bit more what's behind that thought and look at it differently, and have Susanna, who's the client, fill out the thought log from her phone. It'll be a good way for you guys to see how to like have people access that tool on their own. So maybe we'll start off that way, and then we could after that give the full case, and then after that do the breakouts to do some hands-on practice of having clients fill out thought logs with each other and some behavioral activation practice. Does that sound okay for next time? Thanks for the pivot, Susanna. You're always so.
Oh my gosh, of course. Thank you. Yeah, I made a note of that so we can pick up on that for the first part, and then
Great.
I'm excited to
Thank you.
hear from everybody how their breakouts go. No, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. See you guys next week.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.